I'm talking today about what I'm calling the state of the Internet operating system. Now, this, of course, is an event about something called Web 2.0. And when we talk about Web 2.0, we kind of can think of the scene from Casablanca. Major Strasser has been shot, says Louis. And he says, round up the usual suspects. In this case, the usual suspects, lightweight startups, advertising-based business models, crowdsourcing, social media. This is all the stuff that people kind of wrapped up in this concept Web 2.0 that we introduced back in 2004. But for me, Web 2.0 has always meant one thing and one thing only. And that was the idea that the Internet was becoming a platform. And that we had to start thinking deeply about the meaning of that platform if we wanted to get it right. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the evolution of the Internet as a platform, where we are today. I first started talking about this pretty seriously back in 2002 when I ran a conference, our eTech conference, on the subject of building the Internet operating system. But what does it actually mean? You know, I keep using that word, whether it's Web 2.0 or Internet operating system. I don't know that it means what a lot of people think it might mean. The easy first answer is to start thinking about fundamental infrastructure services on the web. Things like Amazon Web Services, cloud computing, Windows Azure, Google App Engine. But I think there's more to it than that. And if you've read my piece, The State of the Internet Operating System, which is on the Radar blog, there's also, I think, handouts down the O'Reilly booth where we went the old-fashioned way and printed this. I start talking about where I think this Internet operating system is really going. And I open with this question. What is the operating system of a Google or Bing search? You might be on a Mac, you might be on a PC, you might be on a mobile phone. The back end is some big server farm. You don't really know what's happening. This is an operation that's happening in the space between. What is the operating system of a mobile phone call? What is the operating system of maps and directions on the phone? What is the operating system actually of a tweet being distributed out to, tens of millions of users? And we start to see this Internet operating system taking shape in the mobile world. And so, for example, maps and directions on the phone, really great example. You have this capability to find out where you are. You're able to tell your phone where you want to go. I don't even have to have an address now. I could just say Moscone. Google will look that up, find the address, and then get me directions from where I am now to where I'm going. I can do this with speech recognition if I want. I can get live traffic. And as I'm driving up, I can actually see the turn-by-turn, from Street View imagery. This is not happening, somehow inside the phone. It's happening on the Internet. And the phone is calling on this Internet operating system to deliver these applications. Now, of course, in this case, all these assets are controlled by Google. But we're starting to see something that looks a little different when you, for example, this is again from my Android phone, look at my favorites list, and the faces are populated by the Facebook app. And when I hover over somebody, I can actually see their Facebook updates, their status updates. So I'm getting this context about the people on my phone from Facebook, again, via this Internet operating system. Now, of course, this is a great illustration because it shows how incomplete things are. Here are my favorites on my phone, and only some of the people are my friends on Facebook. A couple of people there I just haven't bothered, even though they're key O'Reilly employees who I work with all the time. My mother, who's just not on Facebook. I guess I could set her up an account so I could get her picture. My financial advisor. There's people who are clearly important in my life who are not Facebook friends. So we're not there yet. And it's really important to remember because the friend data and the social graph data that's hidden in our phone, in our email, in our communications, I think is still greater than the data on Facebook. And I am just baffled by the people who own this data, that they haven't figured out how to turn it into a system service that's useful to developers. But that's another story. Moving further in this, you look at applications like CabSense. This is the iPhone app that monitors cell phone location data and then uses it to predict where people are getting cabs. So at any particular time of the day, it'll say, oh no, go 2 blocks over, you're much more likely to get a cab. Again, this is, algorithmic intelligence applied to data gathered from the phone, returned. Now, right now, these are all point solutions, but I really do think they're being woven together into a platform. And so we see this also in, augmented reality applications like the Yelp monocle. Just show me what's around here. We see the futures of this in applications like Google Goggles, where we can actually point our camera at something and recognize an object, I think eventually even a face, a person. These are the data capabilities of this Internet operating system. And so I really urge all of you to think deeply about where this is going as you're developing not only your own applications, but as you're choosing what services you're going to use in your applications, because the choices you make can lock you into one future or another. So Ray Kurzweil once said, "I became interested in long-term trends because an invention has to make sense in the world in which it is finished, not the world in which it is started." And all of you are inventing the future. But if you invent for the world that exists now, you are behind the curve. So you have to think about where this is going. And so I've been talking about this Internet operating system idea for a long time. Back in 1997, I was just really focused on open source software, and I was really urging developers to think hard about the Internet and not just about Linux. In 2000, I gave a keynote at Java 1 called "The Network Really Is the Computer." And it was really about web services and the interoperability of services on the net. In 2002, when I did that Internet operating system talk, it was really about Napster and SETI at home, the idea of hey, there's these new kinds of services that are happening on the web. I got serious when I wrote the open source paradigm shift, which is about the worry that this whole thing was actually heading in a direction that was going to lead to new sources of lock-in that we didn't understand. And I wrote a lot more about that in my What is Web 2.0 paper back in 2005. And, of course, then in 2009, 2010, I've been focused a lot more on the future of this thing. But when I wrote What is Web 2.0, there was a lot of touchy-feely stuff in there. This graph that I did about sort of the core competencies of Web 2.0. One of the things I said was you own your own data was one of the core pieces of user positioning. I think that was one of the big areas where I was wrong, because I think we've increasingly seeing that we're being owned by big providers, and I'm not sure that's the way we want it to go. And I wrote this in the open source paradigm shift, though. I really tried to warn about this because Clay Christensen, the Harvard Business School professor, noted that when attractive profits disappear because of commoditization, which is what happened with the PC. He and I were both talking about this idea. The PC became a commodity, and Microsoft figured out the software was going to be very valuable. And I saw that with the Internet and open source software, a lot of what was traditional software was going to become a commodity, but something else was going to become valuable. And this law of conservation of attractive profits is played out where companies that can control vast data assets are ending up getting the attractive profits. And back in 2006, there was this really alarming statement from Deborah Chaparty, who was the VP of operations at Windows Live, where she said, in the future, being a developer on someone's platform will mean being hosted on their infrastructure. And increasingly, we're seeing that that's true. So this future of the Internet operating system is one in which developers are being given kind of a Hobbesian choice. Do we really want a Hobson's choice? Do we really want the choice that developing on someone's platform really means that they own us? I'm not sure we do. So it's crunch time. It's time to start thinking hard about how to keep the web open, and don't take it for granted. So one of the scariest things that I saw in my kind of thinking about the future was when I went a few years back to Wall Street. We did a series of conferences called Money Tech. And I was just trying to learn from financial markets things about the future of the web. Because it seemed to me that, wait a minute, if the web is about networked economies, this is this huge networked economy in financial markets. And what did I find out? One of the real wake-up calls was the way that Wall Street firms used to enable their trading partners, and then they started to trade against them. Right? And that's the scary thing. That's the scary thing. And we see it now, in the news of what Goldman Sachs was up to. And I thought about that, and I said, wow, I bet we're going to see more of that behavior, from the Web 2.0 giants. And guess what? If you were here yesterday, you saw Danny Sullivan giving his talk, The Search Platform, Friend or Vampire, looking at the different ways that Google, yes, they're still enabling developers, but more and more of the links point back to Google. Google is, as I predicted back in 2006, increasingly trading for their own account against developers, against website owners. The web is changing in some fundamental ways. We also see news, if you saw this timeline up on the EFF of Facebook's eroding privacy policy. Pretty scary. You see news like the guy who developed the iPhone app, he quits the project over Apple's tyranny. We see, all the comments about Apple trying to exert more and more control over what happens on their platform, including Steve Jobs' rant about Flash and trying to shut down third-party developer tools. So that's why I'm increasingly framing what's going on in Web 2.0 as a battle for control. Last year in Web Expo in New York, my talk was called The War for the Web. At the Web 2 Summit this fall, we're focusing on points of control. Reminds me really of the Great Game, in some sense back in the Victorian era where Russia, Germany, England were sort of fighting over Afghanistan as the route to India. And they were all everything was around figuring out where were the points of control. And I think that's what we're facing right now. But there is this contrary view. And I wrote about it back in 2000 in my talk, The Network Really Is the Computer. And what I pointed out in the preamble is that ecology teaches us that it takes a web of cooperating species to create a truly rich ecosystem. Each of us depends on thousands, if not millions. Actually, now that we know about the biome in our bodies, we have more bacteria in there than we have human cells. We depend on millions of other organisms, each pursuing its own selfish goals, but somehow weaving a cooperative web. And I think we need to think that way about the web as platform. We're starting to see some good signs of this. I love this announcement the other day. Microsoft using Facebook Open Graph to launch Docs.com. Facebook's doing some really great stuff in this regard with the Open Graph protocol. Yes, there's a lot of control elements there, but there's also an outbound strategy. We see, WordPress integrating with Salesforce. There are signs of people who are figuring out how to leverage each other's assets rather than simply bring it all back to themselves. So in my State of the Internet Operating System post, I kind of did an eye chart, which I don't expect you to read now, of who owns what assets. Because again, I think of this Internet Operating System as consisting of various subsystems like media, payment, speech recognition, location, identity, so on. And the thing that I want you to see on that chart, even though you can't read everything else, it's handicapping across the top: Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and the last column is other. And the column that has the most dots in it is other. That is all of us. And but let me just briefly handicap the various players and what I see as their strengths and weaknesses. So Apple clearly has got the front-end device to beat. The iPhone is a thing of beauty. They've added the iPad, an incredibly rich device with an incredibly rich ecosystem around it already. And it's a really interesting point. Even though the iPhone and the iPad are web access devices, they also represent a fundamental challenge to the web. Steve Jobs is trying to build an alternative way for people to consume content. I think it's very deliberate, and I think the web is actually in the position today that Windows was in 1995. Where there's a new kid in town that is the most fundamental challenge to the platform itself that we've seen in many, many years. And I really think that Apple does have a vision of world domination. They've got boatloads of cash. Where they're weak is that I don't think that they really understand this data part of the Internet operating system. And I see this most clearly in the example of Mobile Me. Because, of course, Facebook is demonstrating that the social graph is one of these incredibly powerful and important pieces of the Internet operating system. And Apple is offering Mobile Me, which is their sort of equivalent of, hey, let's give you a home page and identity on the web. They're offering it as a $99 add-on to some subset of their users. You think, wow, they should be trying to get everybody on the Mobile Me. Or else they should be partnering with Facebook if they thought the other way and said, no, we're a partnering kind of company. But does anybody here think Apple's a partnering kind of company? So I think that's their big weakness. And I think that it will bite them in the end, perhaps even more than the idea that many people have talked about when they're looking at iPhone versus Android, of the parallel of one supplier versus multiple suppliers, which we saw with the PC having multiple suppliers of a commodity device, actually one. But this data weakness is their greatest weakness. Google. I think Google far and away understands this Internet operating system game better than anyone else. They have the richest and most complete data subsystems of any of the players. They've been working for years and years to build things that are way, way ahead of the curve. I mean, why the devil are they spending all this money on automated translation? Why were they investing so much in speech recognition? It's still not all that good, right? But they understand that is the future. That Ray Kurzweil quote is in their bones. Right? They know that they're building for a future that we're not there at yet. They also have great assets in video with YouTube, for example. They've got good communications assets with email and messaging. They've got a payment subsystem. Google Checkout was not a first-tier player, but suddenly, because of the Android market, it is, because everybody has to have an account in order to buy applications on their Android phone. They've got a strong front-end device play. They've got a rich mobile app ecosystem, not as robust as Apple's yet. They've got a monetization engine for developers, both on the web and on the Android market. Although our O'Reilly research shows that there are far fewer paid apps in the Android market proportionally than there are on iPhone. I think something like 70% of iPhone apps are paid, something like 40% of Android apps are paid. So a bit of weakness there. They've got great experience, though, in algorithmic intelligence. They know when they're weak, and wherever they're weak, they're strategically using open source and open standards to try to strengthen their hand in areas like the open social and so on. They've got boatloads of cash. Their biggest weakness is just that they're Google. Everybody is so scared of them, or has been so scared of them, that they're the target. They're in the eyes of Washington in the same way that Microsoft used to be, and that actually is going to constrain them a lot. I'm not sure it's really fair, because everybody is playing this game, and I don't think that Google is really intrinsically stronger than anyone else, and someone like Apple should be just as much a target as Google, or neither of them should be a target, because we're going to see a great collision of giants, and it's not clear how it's going to play out. But the biggest weakness that I see of Google is that they're starting to, as I said earlier, trade for their own account. They're trying to own too much of the pie. They used to be tremendous at creating value for everyone around them, and now I think they're spending too much time trying to create value for Google. And I would advise them to think deeply about that. Microsoft has many of the same data assets as Google. But what I'm seeing that's really interesting, because they're the underdog, Microsoft is having a willingness to partner. They are no longer the one that's trying to own it all. They also have boatloads of cash. The biggest problem I would say that Microsoft has is they still have kind of a strategy tax from existing businesses. This is a term that was introduced back in the old days of Microsoft, where certain things have to be reconciled with whether they support Windows or not, or whether they support Office or not. And I think this may hamper them in some of the strategic decisions they make over time. Amazon, clearly the leader in cloud computing infrastructure level. They're also a leader in what you might call the thing graph. We talked about the social graph, but Amazon has immense amounts of data on stuff. And stuff is one of the, things that the Internet operating system is also about. They've also got deep data and algorithmic intelligence, but they do have less cache than their rivals. They have a weaker device play, and they also have strategy tax issues. For example, they can't make one-click the default payment subsystem for e-commerce on the web because, hey, it would weaken the core advantage that they have in their own application and monetization engine. Facebook. Social graph, it's only one of these subsystems, but boy, is it a big one. There's this great line from the Greek fabulist Archilochus. He said, the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. And Facebook certainly knows one big thing. And what's really interesting for me is that Facebook started out, the first version of the platform was an inbound platform. Bring people onto Facebook. And increasingly, you see that they have understood that the platform strategy for the Internet operating system is to become useful to other people. So I think that they are actually turning their weakness into a strength because they are the company that is most aggressively trying to be useful to others. But the last point, I mentioned this earlier, everyone is stronger than anyone individually. And so it's really, really important that we start looking at these different models of the Internet operating system. I have two versions that this is actually an image that I used in my talks back in 2003. Two kinds of platform, the one ring to rule them all, or the model of the Internet. The picture on the right is a routing map of the Internet. Small pieces loosely joined, everybody cooperating. And so with that, my advice to all the players, is to think about O'Reilly's motto, which is to create more value than you capture. A motto like don't be evil is great, but it's binary. It's very hard to say, wow, is this evil or is it not? But if you ask, am I creating more value than I capture? Then you can start to quantify and you can say, yes, I am building value for users. Yes, I am destroying this particular company who, is going to hate me as a result, but it's the right thing to do for users. Or you can say, yeah, I'm enabling this class of company, even though I'm making it hard for that. I think every one of these companies should be thinking about this right now. If I had to call it, I'd say Facebook is doing the best job of creating more value than they try to capture for themselves. And it's paradoxical that when you create more value than you capture, you do create value for yourself. So I would just urge all of you, as you build your apps, think about being part of this cooperative Internet operating system. Not one where you try to own it all, but one where you gain strength by working together. Thank you very much.